people with that diagnosis of multiple personality disorder aren't really any different from anybody else, except that their system got blown apart much more by the horrific trauma they suffered. What I've also come to conclude after years of researching this is that it's the natural state of the mind to be that way, to have what I call parts.
All right, welcome. So today we're talking with a man who is revolutionizing our understanding of the human psyche. Dr. Richard Schwartz is the founder of Internal Family Systems Therapy, or IFS, which is centered around the idea that we are all multiple personalities. Now, this one radical shift in our thinking offers us numerous explanations for human behavior, giving us a way to heal our own hurts, overcome limiting beliefs, and also, I believe, can be beneficial in a corporate environment as well, which is today's topic. IFS is now considered evidence-based and has become a widely used form of psychotherapy, particularly with trauma. Dr. Schwartz has written numerous books on the topic. His new book for non-therapists is called No Bad Parts. It's not this one. It's actually this one, which I've got here on Kindle.
Right?
And it has a very interesting foreword by Alanis Morissette. From Chicago and now on the faculty of the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, I give you Dr. Richard Schwartz.
Thank you, Erin Alia. I'm honored to be with you today, and thanks for that lovely introduction.
You bet. So our topic for today is IFS in a corporate environment. But since most people don't actually know what IFS is, how about we start with the question, what is IFS?
So IFS originally was a form of psychotherapy, as you mentioned, and it's grown to be more than that. It's could be considered a life practice. Some people think of it as a spiritual practice. It's a different paradigm for understanding human nature and the way the mind works. So it's become a lot of different things, and it's being used, like you mentioned, in a lot of different areas, including in the corporate world. But yeah, so it's been quite an adventure.
So help me understand, when you say that we are all multiple personalities, what are the implications of that? What does that really mean to you?
Yeah, so the little history, I started as a regular old family therapist and uh, got frustrated when I was doing an outcome study because I wasn't getting the outcome I wanted. And out of frustration, I began asking my clients why they weren't cooperating, and they started talking about what they called parts. They'd say, a part of me, this critic, starts to attack me at different times, and that makes another part of me feel totally worthless and empty and alone. And that's so distressing to feel that another part jumps in and makes me binge. And but then the critic comes back and attacks the binge. And so they were caught in the kind of vicious cycle all day. And at first I thought, boy, these clients are sicker than I thought. You know, maybe they have a multiple personality disorder. But then I started listening inside myself, and oh my God, I've got them too. And they interact in very similar ways inside of me. And so then I got curious, and I just started to explore what are these things. And I was lucky that I didn't have a lot of psychodynamic or psychoanalytic training. So I had to come to the phenomena without a lot of presuppositions. And as I asked questions, I began to learn that they aren't what they seem, that indeed they are like what are called alters in people with multiple personality disorder. But for me, what I've come to conclude is that people with that diagnosis of multiple personality disorder aren't really any different from anybody else, except that their system got blown apart much more by the horrific trauma they suffered. But this idea that we have these full range inner personalities seems to be universal, and that what I've also come to conclude after years of researching this is that it's the natural state of the mind to be that way, to have what I call parts, which I use that word simply because it's the most user-friendly word. People don't balk when you say one part of you feels this way and another part feels that way. Or that they would if I said one of your sub-personalities feels this way or something like that. So yeah, so it's the natural state of the mind to be subdivided this way and to have these inner voices or impulses or energies interacting with each other. So if you're facing a dilemma, you're going to have one part saying, do it, another part saying, no, don't you dare. And they have these inner conversations all the time that we just think of as thinking. But if you were to slow it all down and focus on one at a time, you'd find out that that one who says, don't you dare, has a lot to tell you about its fear. And the one who says, go for it, will tell you a lot about its frustration and how hard it tries to get you to do things.
So the implication here being that you can actually talk to your parts then, is that what you're getting at?
yeah, I mean, they talk to each other all the time, and a lot of the work is designed to help you, in this case, focus on one of them at a time, usually to start, and just get curious about it and ask some questions inside, and don't think of the answer, just wait for an answer to come back. And people get these answers that surprise them a lot of the time. And as they get to know the part more and more, what they learn is these parts aren't what they seem. So the critic isn't just a bundle of parental critical voices, but indeed it's a part of you that's desperately trying to keep you safe by yelling at you and trying to motivate you by yelling at you or something like that. And it's protecting other parts of you that are very vulnerable and it thinks would get very hurt if it didn't yell at you all the time. And so ultimately, as I did this more and more, I came to the conclusion that all of these parts are they contain valuable qualities, but they're forced out of their naturally valuable states by trauma or by what are called attachment injuries, which would be bad parenting, basically. And they're forced into roles that they don't like, but they don't think it's safe to not do these things, to not try and protect you that way. And some of the roles can be very damaging.
So what are some examples of roles that the parts get pushed into?
Yeah, so if you were traumatized as a child, there's there's what are commonly called these inner children within us that are very vulnerable and sensitive, and before they get hurt, provide all these wonderful qualities like liveliness and creativity and joy and awe at the world. But after they get hurt, because they're the most sensitive parts of us, or they get terrified or they feel shame, sense of worthlessness because of some interaction with a parent or something like that. After they get burdened with those kinds of feelings, we tend to try to get away from them because they can make us feel bad. They make us feel what the burdens they carry. And so in our inner world, we tend to try and lock them away in inner basements or abysses or cysts, and thinking that we're just moving on from the memories, sensations, emotions, and beliefs of the trauma, not realizing that we're locking up basically our juice, our most precious qualities, simply because it got hurt. Those parts got hurt. So those we call exiles. So that's one set of roles that happen because of trauma. And then when you get a lot of exiles, you feel much more delicate and the world feels a lot more dangerous because so many things now could trigger all that. And if the exiles get triggered, it's like an explosion of emotion these flames of emotion are going to consume you and pull you back into those scenes. And because these parts are also frozen in time, they're stuck back in the trauma. So other parts are forced out of their naturally valuable roles to become what I call protectors.
If I can interrupt for a moment,
Sorry.
in your own words, how would you define trauma? Just setting aside any clinical definition.
Yeah, trauma is any experience that is overwhelming to your system and creates these kinds of burdens inside. So trauma isn't traumatizing per se, in the sense that if something really bad happens to you And instead of exiling a bunch of parts that get hurt, you went to them and embraced them and helped them unburden in the moment, you wouldn't have any residual effects from the trauma. But because we live in this kind of rugged individualist society, we and everybody around us tells us to just move on and don't look back and just, let it all go
Yeah, let it go or suck it up
or suck it up.
right.
Then we do lock away all this stuff, thinking we're moving on from it, but then we have this traumatized inner system because of the way we reacted to the trauma, not because of the trauma itself. So we have all these exiles, and then we now have to have all these protectors, some of whom are trying to manage your life so that the exiles never get triggered. So
You
some
give
of
us
them,
an example of that.
yeah, so some of them become very controlling inner critics who are trying to make you feel so bad that you never take a risk, for example. You never extend yourself. You don't let anybody see who you are. They keep you under the radar, and they think they're keeping you safe. And they think they're protecting somebody who's still 6 years old or however old you were when they had to jump into this role. And then some of them try to protect you by monitoring and managing your relationships so that no one gets close enough to hurt you, or tries to control all the people around you in the corporate setting. There are CEOs who are very controlling of everything, and everybody feels oppressed. But it's because they just can't stand. Their exiles get very triggered if something unexpected happens, or there's a whole variety of common, what we call manager roles. These are protectors who are really trying to just control your environment. They'll try and control your appearance so that you don't get rejected. They try to control your performance so you get a lot of accolades to counter the worthlessness the exiles carry. They try to control your body. They try to control how much they let you feel emotion by keeping you in your head all the time, things like that. So these are just a handful of the common manager roles that protectors get forced into. But despite all those quote unquote defenses, the world still has a way of breaking through and triggering your exiles. And when that happens, it's a big emergency. It's like parts of you feel like you're going to die if you keep feeling this stuff. And so there's another set of parts who have to immediately get you away, either by distracting you until the flames of exile emotion burn themselves out, or by dousing them with some substance, or by getting you higher than the flames somehow. So we call them firefighters. So it's a very simple map to this inner territory. The big rubric is protectors. Under that are managers and firefighters, and they're all trying to contain and protect these exiles. And most of us, because most of us come out of our childhoods with a lot of exiles, most of us are running our lives from these protectors who can, make us strive, and get us to work really hard and help us achieve at a certain level so that we become a CEO or something. But they don't make for good leaders because they're really just trying to protect, and they might get impulsively angry at times, or yeah.
So would you say that firefighters are the biggest source of, say, addictions in a person's life?
Yeah, sometimes managers, but generally protectors. So the common addictive pattern is, say you have a part who feels very, very worthless or very, very terrified, an exile that you tried to lock up. But to keep it from taking over, you need to get away from it. And so you have a firefighter that whenever you get triggered, whenever something happens that makes you feel powerless or worthless or scared, then you go to a bar and you get drunk to get away from it. So that would be a firefighter activity. The exile gets triggered, the firefighter has to do whatever it takes in the moment to get you away from that. And these firefighters, for them, it's like your life is on the line. So they don't care about the collateral damage to your body or to your relationships or to your job. They know they just got to get you higher than the flames. But then the critic comes in and attacks you for having done the firefighter activity.
So this is a different part then.
Different part. This is a manager. So the firefighter is the addiction. And then the manager comes in because it wants to keep everything under control. And the firefighter takes you out of control. So it attacks you for having gotten drunk. And people around you attack you for having gotten drunk. But all that criticism goes right to the heart of the exile, who now feels even more worthless. And so that makes the job of the firefighter even more important. So it gets you drunk more often. So
So
that's
what's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
so that's the common pattern for a lot of addiction. Sometimes the addicted part is more of a manager. It's trying to keep you high all the time so that nothing really triggers your exiles. You never feel hurt. But yeah, anyway.
So what then is the solution to this tangled mess? Would you recommend someone sit down and try to talk to their exile directly?
Not until they've gotten permission from their protectors. So if I were working with you and you had a pattern like that, I would generally have you start with the protector, with the manager who's so critical and angry at you for getting drunk. And because as long as it's wailing away in there, it's really not safe to go to your exile. So
What would happen if you did go to an exile directly?
then there would be what we call backlash, and the critic would attack you for having been vulnerable or for they have all kinds of excuses for attacking you.
Right.
so so we go to the critic first, and we go not expecting it to change much because they won't until the system is less vulnerable, until you've healed some exiles. So I would have you focus. You want to role play it?
That'd be great. Yes.
Okay. So Arenalia, so go ahead and focus on that critical voice and find it in your body, around your body. Where do you find it?
Find it like here wanting to constrict.
Constrict, try and pull you in. And as you notice that constriction, how do you feel toward that part of you?
Well, it's saying work harder, work harder, work harder.
Okay.
And I guess I feel like, okay, I got to do it. Like, you know,
So you kind of obey it. You try to anyway.
right.
Yeah. It feels like you depend on it or something.
Yes.
Okay. All right. But just for a second, let's ask the parts of you who feel that way to just give you some space to get to know it rather than just obey it. And see if you can get curious about it. Okay? How do you feel toward it now?
Yes. I feel curious.
So
Like,
let it know that.
why do we feel this way?
You're good.
Curiosity.
Let it know you're curious about why it has to constrict you this way. And don't think of the answer, just wait for an answer to come.
I kind of get this image of being young, um, maybe about 7 or 8 years old, and my dad kind of rushing me along to school, like,
Mhm.
you know, gotta get up, gotta go, 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 just that feeling of being rushed and
Yeah.
being sent out the door.
Okay. So let this part know you get that it kind of lives back there in that time. And ask if it carries some of your father's energy.
Yes, yes, it does.
Okay. So as you get to know it, how are you feeling toward it now?
I'm feeling a sense of understanding towards it.
So let it know that. Yeah, and ask what it's afraid would happen if it didn't do this to you all the time, if it didn't push you this way or constrict you like this.
It's afraid that teachers and authority figures would be mad at me.
Yeah. So it's trying to protect you from their criticism.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So let it know you get that, and if it feels right, even extend some appreciation to it for trying to keep you safe that way, and see how it reacts to your appreciation.
Yeah, it's happy for the appreciation.
Yeah. And maybe even ask it how old it thinks you are.
Yeah, it's saying about 8 years old.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So let it know when you were 8 years old, it really, you needed it to do this. But go ahead and tell it how old you are now. You don't have to tell us, but, and just see how it reacts to that information.
Yeah, it seems kind of surprised.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And with that, maybe let it know you don't need that same level of outside motivation now, if that's true, if you agree with that.
It's disagreeing with me on that. It's saying, no, we kind of do need that.
Okay. And do you still agree with that, or you
I don't at my age.
yeah, well,
Well,
that's what I'm asking. Yeah.
maybe to some extent I do. I think
I will, we can negotiate with it. So
yeah.
let it know at your age you don't need it as much as it's doing it, but there's still a role for it, and see how it reacts to that.
Yeah, it's a lot more amenable to that. It likes the idea that it can still have some sort of a role, but
Yeah.
maybe doesn't have to be so extreme.
Okay, good. Yeah. So, yeah, just thank it for letting you know all this, and let it know this isn't your first or your last encounter with it. You're going to keep getting to know it better and work with it.
Yeah, it likes to hear that.
Okay, good. So come on back when you're ready. So that's just I don't know if it was a role play or if it was real, but
That was real. That was real.
okay, good.
Yeah.
So it was just a really nice example of how in, I don't know, 5 minutes, you can start a new relationship with a part that's been quite dominant in your life and help it realize that it can trust you, because the other big part of IFS is that in addition to these parts and sort of beneath the surface of them is what I call yourself with a capital S, who can lead your inner system and your external system. But most of them don't know you very well because they do think you're still 8 years old. So it's helping them get to know there's this inner leader who can not only talk to them the way you just did and reassure them, but also can interact with people in the outside world in a way that's always productive. So that's probably the centerpiece of IFS, is that amazingly, I find that everybody has this self, this essence inside of them that's a good leader, both internally and externally. And a lot of the work is simply getting these parts to trust that you're there and they don't have to run everything because they're young. In family therapy, we used to call them parentified children. They're like children who are forced to be parents when they, shouldn't have to carry that kind of responsibility.
Right. At a young
So,
age, they're forced into that role.
exactly. Just like this part was forced to take on your father's energy to try and get you to please him.
Right. And
And
it's interesting
like,
because it wasn't even really a bad energy per se. It was just that feeling of being rushed.
yeah, exactly. And that part felt like, to please him and everybody, all your teachers and everybody, you just had to keep it going and rush and push. And and it's stayed in that role all these years.
Right. So I had a question just a moment ago. It's left my mind.
Okay.
If it comes back, I'll bring it up. But for now, let's now see if we can talk about how would you see IFS fitting into the corporate world?
Yeah, I kind of leave that to, we're training a lot of consultants and coaches now, and I don't do a lot. I work individually with some corporate leaders, but I don't consult to corporations very much or anything like that. So, but there are several different ways I could see it, or we do see it working, which one of which is to work with leaders. So it is a model of good leadership, because what I'm calling self over the years, as I explored what, because it's like the same person is in there. It's like we all have the same essence when all our parts open space for it. And that person who can lead both in the inner and outer world has these same qualities. And the qualities, oddly enough, all begin with the letter C. So that person is calm, confident, curious, compassionate, has clarity, has creativity, courage, and connectedness. So those are what I call the 8 C's of self-leadership. And when people can lead corporations from that place, everything gets harmonized. Self just naturally knows how to create harmony.
I have to say, one of the things I found really fascinating about your books so far is that it not only gives a model for organizing your inner system, but as you learn to organize your inner system of relationships, it also teaches you how to deal with teams, basically. Because I have a team inside me that I'm
Okay.
managing in a sense. And
Yeah,
as I become more skilled at managing that team, I also become more skilled at managing a team in a business environment or really any other environment.
exactly right. It's all parallel. How you relate to your parts inside, to your inner team, will parallel how you relate to people who resemble your parts in the outside world.
Can you expand on that? That sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, so if for example, you don't like your exiles because you think they're very weak and they need to be tough, or they need to work harder, or, then when one of your team members or employees comes in a vulnerable place, you're going to react to that person in the same way you react to your own vulnerability, and which will be critical, which will be harsh or dismissive. Uh, but once you can go to your own vulnerability, to those vulnerable parts of you, with curiosity and compassion, and be present with them, then you can do the same for your employee. Or
That's
if,
fantastic.
for example, you have a big fear of your own anger, then when there's conflict in your organization, the scared parts are going to dominate. You're going to try to avoid it in some way or another. So it's all, you could go through lots of different scenarios that way.
Good. So help us understand the meaning of the title, No Bad Parts. Why did you choose that name?
To be provocative. So, um, and because I basically, that's what I found. I'm an empiricist. From this very scientific family. And as I was hearing about my clients' parts, I just I researched it. I just kept getting them to teach me about it, and wound up trying some of what was working with sort of mildly extreme parts, with parts of people who had done heinous things and seemed evil even, and were seen by our society as evil. And we've done this work with sex offenders, we've done it with uh, people in jail for murder and so on. And even those parts, when approached with curiosity and compassion, and they'll tell their secret history of how they were forced into the roles they're in, how they carry often these perpetrating parts carry the energy, like that part of you carried your father's energy, which was pretty benign. But if you were severely abused by your father, then some of these protectors look around the room and say, who's got power in this room? It's that guy who's hurting me. And they take on his energy. And then they get stuck with this desire to punish vulnerability and to attack little kids or to, do things like that. And they're stuck with it. It's not who they are, but it's in them, that energy, that burden. And so I would say, as I would work with the next person, I say, this one can't be good. It's done such horrible things. And indeed, it turned out, as we could unburden it, it was also a good part who just happened to kill somebody. So, so it's radical. It's a radical understanding of human nature that has been a tough sell in both psychotherapy and in our society.
So if
But
we were to use an example of everyone's favorite example of the perfect evil person, Adolf Hitler, for example, what would you have to say about that?
yeah, well, if you study his history, uh, he not only had abuse in his family, he was in the trenches in World War One. He just had huge amounts of trauma. And when you have all that trauma, you have parts that really want power and they want to dominate, and they can become what would be called psychopathic, in the sense of, I don't care what it takes, I don't care who I kill, I'm just going to be on top of the world. And so if I were working with him, I suspect that's what we would have found.
So it's possible that all of that could have been prevented had he had access to
Yeah,
this type of work.
yeah, although people like him don't usually go to therapy until they crash, until something doesn't work.
So here's now a question then. What kind of a dynamic among someone's parts would you expect to find in, let's use two different extreme types of people that I might see in the business world. So on the one hand, in the business world, you've got maybe people that are so far on this extreme that they're willing to, commit fraud, rip people off. They're just, completely driven towards just money at all costs with no concern for anything else. Then you have other people on this other side of the spectrum in business who they want to make money, they want to be more wealthy, but they're so overly concerned with hurting other people or worrying them. What would you expect to see inside these people's internal systems that looks different, and what would look the same?
Different from each other. Yeah. So, it's different sets of protectors. So the driven guy would, a lot of these guys, because I worked with people like that, a lot of them have parts that uh, are driven to prove that they're valuable, and the way to do that is to get a lot of money and power to counter the worthlessness that their exiles feel. And they're not even aware of it. All they're just so dominated by getting more and more, and it's like this empty bucket with a hole in it. It just keeps draining through. And those parts are so desperate, they don't care about the consequences to the people in their way. And so again, I've worked with a number of those kinds of people, and when we can get permission from that part that dominates them so much and ask what it's protecting, it typically does go to these exiles that carry a lot of worthlessness, or it's usually either worthlessness or parts that are stuck in times when they felt totally powerless and swore, never again am I going to be powerless.
Never again. That's a very powerful word that some parts speak.
That's right. And so uh, they just decided I don't care about the consequences. I'm going to get a lot of power. So,
Right. Now, how
and
about those? Oh, sorry, I'll let you
no,
finish.
go ahead. Go ahead.
How about those on the other side, those who they want to make more money, but they've always struggled to get ahead. They've always struggled to make money. Um, perhaps the type that believes that there's something inherently evil in making more money, but they're also conflicted because they want to make more.
Yeah. So there you're talking more about what we call a polarization. So we have these protectors, and they might have one like the guy we were talking about, who is really eager to look good and to have people respect by having a lot of money. But then they have another protector who is afraid to hurt people or to piss off anybody by striving too much. And so the two of those parts are fighting inside constantly. And in the guy you're describing situation, uh, the the one who's afraid is often winning, and uh, so that's this interpolarization kind of paralyzes the person. And but both of those protectors are also protecting these exiles that maybe one part doesn't feel worthy of getting a lot of money or capable, doesn't feel,
I think that's very common for people.
yeah, doesn't feel like, I mean, that's what I've found in terms of doing this work with people, that
Right. They just feel like they don't deserve it. They don't
they don't
deserve
deserve
getting.
it. Some of them feel they don't deserve it. Some of them feel like they're incompetent, like they're going to fail, and they'd rather not take the risk and not fail. So, yeah, those are some of the common dynamics.
So now another question. I have somewhat of a sales background, not extensive, but enough to know a few things about sales. And sales is all
Mhm.
about being persuasive. And
Mhm.
we see different types of salespeople too. We see like the slimy salesperson that just doesn't really care about the other person. They just want to push a product or a service on someone. But then we also see those that are just genuinely persuasive, genuinely persuasive in a good way, like they actually care about the people they work with. Um, Now, my question here is just simply, can IFS help make you more persuasive and hopefully in a positive way?
Yeah. So, to give you a example that's near and dear to me, uh, I currently am working with some of the top social activists in the country who run organizations you would have heard of, and they come to me often because they are dominated by the kinds of parts we're talking about. Some of them got into social activism because they got hurt in a similar way to the people they're trying to help, and so they're dominated by a righteous part, that's really trying to push and convince everybody of their position, and is very critical when that doesn't work. There's a person in the book you're reading that I described the session I did with him. And so my goal is to help them do their selling of their activist position from what I call self, from those 8C words instead. And when you are trying to talk from that position where you're actually listening to people because you have curiosity, and the people sense your compassion as you're talking to them, and and you're very clear in what you're saying, and when you're using those 8C words, um, it's a much easier sell because people do sense the authenticity in what you're saying.
Yes, authenticity, I think, is so important when it comes to sales. I mean, people buy from people that they know, like, and trust, and
Right.
and it's really hard to fake that. And
Right.
some people can, but
Hmm.
in general, people can smell when you're not being authentic.
Yeah.
So anything that I think can help someone be more authentic, I think it's going to help, in all areas of your life, whether it's sales or your personal life or anything else.
Now, as a
And
caveat to that, I worked with people who as we did the work, the healing work, they decided they didn't want to keep selling this product because the product is really not that great, and moved on to something else. So once you get self-led, you want to do something that actually serves people rather than just makes money for your company.
Yes, very good. Very good point. Also, backtracking just a little bit, I know what you're talking about with your work with the activists. I thought that that part of the book was very fascinating, largely because there was something you said that a lot of righteous activists who may have a very good cause, nevertheless inflict a lot of damage as well.
Yeah,
And they're completely unaware. We're so quick to demonize the other side.
that's
And
right.
we've got one side versus the other, and we're so convinced that our side is the right side and the other one is the evil people. And being able to see how these dynamics work inside of us to like how that causes damage on either side of any social issue or political issue. I thought that that was really eye-opening to see that. So I really enjoyed reading that part of your book.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel good about that.
Great. Well, I think that that brings us to a pretty natural conclusion, unless you have anything else. If you have, I don't know if you would have like a message for the business world. I know I didn't ask you to prepare anything like that, but if you had a chance to say something to the business world, what would you say?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is there is this self in everybody, including business leaders, and it's contagious. So if you can be in those 8 C's, it's going to be like a tuning fork for everybody around, for your team, and it'll pull the self of everybody around you. And self-led teams are not only productive, but they're enjoyable, and people like their lives when they can work from that place. And also, protective parts are contagious. So if you're leading from a protector, it's going to bring the protectors of everybody around you, and you're going to have a protector-led organization that isn't so much fun and isn't that productive.
Very well spoken. Thanks so much. I'm going to end with one final question here. Since you do have multiple books on IFS, do they need to start at any particular book, or where should someone who doesn't plan to be a therapist but wants
Right.
to be a leader, where should they start when it comes to your books? Is this a good book to start with, or
Yeah, No Bad Parts is written. No Bad Parts is written for people like you. Um, the other book you have there, Internal Family Systems Second Edition, is more of a manual for therapists. Uh, there are also on our website, which is ifs-institute.com, in our store there are, one is a book called An Introduction to Internal Family Systems that's written for the public too, and another one called You're the One You've Been Waiting For. It's about IFS as applied to relationships that people like also. So any of those three books is a good place to start. And also on Sounds True, I did an audio course, I guess you call it, called Greater Than the Sum of the Parts, that people seem to like a lot also.
great? And then you also have, I think you have like a directory of IFS trained therapists as well. Is that true?
That is true, yeah, all over the world.
Because there's a lot of value in working with someone. A book is very helpful, but I think some people might be so fractured inside that you really kind of need to work with someone that has some skill with this.
Yeah, not even if you're fractured inside. I mean, it's very hard for me to do it by myself. And and on the other hand, some people can do all kinds of things by themselves. So it just varies a lot.
Right. That's really interesting to hear you say that yourself, and you're the founder of it. So,
Yeah, it's
um,
kind of ironic. Yeah,
well, I think it just goes to show that it just helps to have another human being.
totally.
So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Schwartz. We really appreciate your time today and wish you well.
Thank you, Arnalia.